Hello and welcome to No Veto Video. I'm Carson.
And I'm Catherine, and this week we're responding to the relatively recent film The Mountain Between Us, starring Idris Elba as Ben and Kate Winslet as Alex, directed by Hani Abu-Assad.
The Mountain Between Us follows the struggle for survival of two ordinary people whose charter plane goes down during a winter storm in the mountains.
So I picked this movie because I'm a big fan of Idris Elba, and I am pretty much willing to plunk down ticket money to go and see his work. Unfortunately, the last time that we saw him on the big screen was in the incredibly disappointing film The Dark Tower. And so my hope was that we were going to be able to have sort of an easy weekend movie and get our Idris train back on track. So that was my goal. At one point in the film, the main characters have found shelter in a place that also has a piano. And Ben's character, the Idris Elba character, finds himself going over to the keyboard and hitting one note. Did this performance from him feel like it was hitting one note over and over? Is that symbolism? Were the filmmakers trying to talk to us about how things were, or how are you experiencing this movie?
The character did feel a little not one-dimensional at the beginning, but I could see what you're experiencing there. The character, both of them, actually went through a lot of development as the movie progressed, so it'd be interesting if they brought that back at the end and maybe was playing a whole melody.
Perhaps he was more than one note by the end. Now, I think one of the things that I experienced as an audience member is that I kept trying to jump ahead to make the characters more interesting. Then it turned out the source material from the novel by Charles Martin was going to let them be. At one point I had convinced myself that the main character, that the Ben character had lied to the other character about his background as a way of, concealing something very dramatic. And it turned out that no, in fact, he'd been telling the truth the whole time. And she had never doubted it, and I was the only one sitting there doubting it. It was pretty embarrassing.
Yeah, when you told me that later, I'm not sure what you were picking up on that made you think that.
I think I just desperately desired it to be a slightly more nuanced tale than it turned out to be.
It would definitely have been an interesting plot twist, especially if what he was hiding was maybe a dark past or
anything, a dark future. I don't know, but
a dark tower.
Well, no more of that. But there was a part of it was just like, well, he can't be just what he says he is, because, what's the fun in that? Although, on the other hand, I was thinking, he's so closed off at the beginning. He's so, retreated from his own emotional life that he's not even curious about, what's going on with the other person, apart from the most perfunctory kind of thing. And so they find themselves thrown together in this circumstance without really knowing one another. And of course the Alex character, played by Kate Winslet, is a journalist, and so she's constantly probing and constantly trying to draw out from the Ben character in a way that at times it's
Yeah, it's very cringeworthy at times. She starts going through his belongings and listening to his voicemail, and
so I thought for sure that meant that she didn't believe his story and that she was trying to get to the bottom of who he really was. And then she uncovered, his ID, and it said exactly his name the way that he'd said it, and she found his notes, and they turned out to be exactly as it was very disappointing. And that being said, the film itself wasn't disappointing, at least not to me. So that was an interesting sort of, even though the notes of this film, with one sort of major exception, at least on my part, fell exactly where one would expect them to. The film did have one surprise for me that caused me to like grab Carson's arm really hard, and we both almost jumped out of our seats. But
you from the movie and me from the sudden bruising on my arm.
Even though the film itself laid out the story that it was trying to tell in a very conventional sort of way, I still found that there was a lot to enjoy about this story.
Mm-hmm. The cinematography, the wide-angle shots of the landscape was... They clearly put a lot of thought into what they were filming. It wasn't just haphazard or on a studio set.
We often forget just how empty the wild spaces of the world can still feel, even with so much encroachment into those landscapes by human activity. But there was very little. In fact, anytime there was something that turned out to be human-made, it almost came as a shock, just how empty this space that they managed to find felt.
And at the risk of sounding like a one-trick pony, because I've brought it up on a number of our movies, the sense of isolation, that they were just completely alone.
They were. And I think that's part of what catapults that sense of togetherness in their survival. That they were very alone, but they weren't alone. You know, like they had each other. And the fact that it wasn't a convenient relationship from the very beginning, that there was tension and that there was strife, and so that there was this sense of like having to come together instead of just, you know, sort of someone has asserted their dominance and, you know, now we will follow the leader. There was no sense of that from either of these characters. They both were convinced that they were the leaders. And I think that that's part of what lets the blossoming of their relationship as the movie goes on feel more natural. As I feel like when you have two adults who are kind of in a relationship together, there's this idea of like, yeah, no, everybody thinks that their way is the right way, and that there is this sort of coming together and tension and trying to work out like how things should be until you come together. Again, while the beats of this story were very predictable, it felt very human and it felt very natural at the same time.
Mm-hmm. So why did you pick this movie? Besides Idris Elba, I mean, just because... It was
really just Idris Elba. I mean...
No deeper...
no deeper meaning than that. Excepting to say that I knew it was probably going to turn out to be a romance, and I'm usually down for that, and Idris Elba. I really... That was the big ticket seller for me. Now, in the theater where we saw it, we were one of 4 couples.
Yeah, something like that.
So it was a small theater, and that was actually like close to capacity for that particular theater. It was a small theater.
It wasn't that small.
It was pretty small. Anyway, but you know, at the end of it, I could tell we had a very extroverted fellow audience member who turned around at the end of it and sort of did a poll and saw how did people experience the rest of the film. And it turned out that everybody had kind of enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's not a deep movie. There's not a lot of... Even the times where it goes for a deep sort of character study, it really doesn't hit that nail on the head. But it hits a nice nail on the head of, like, how do people who need to come together come together? Mm-hmm. And if that's something that you're willing to spend a small amount of time on, this movie has a pretty short run. I think it's hard to go wrong.
Mm-hmm. Did anything surprise you?
Yes, something surprised me a great deal. But that's just because I kind of thought that we had gotten to a place where it should be more safe. And then it turns out that we were not safe in that spot. And by we, I mean, of course, the characters with whom I was deeply empathized at the time. And so that when the surprising thing happened, like I said, I just about came out of my chair.
I was thinking more with the plot or storyline. Did this go in a direction you didn't anticipate? But yes, that also.
I think there was a very grown-up way in which they dealt with the fact that there were pre-existing relationships, at least for one of the characters. And in a story like this, sometimes that pre-existing relationship gets treated pretty shabbily to sort of make way for the new relationship. And there was, I thought, something very humane and decent that says we're going to take those characters seriously, even if they don't ultimately, in the case of one of them, merit last names.
So at one point it felt to me like the movie was about to end, and it even faded out for a particularly long time. And I thought, oh, this is the end of the movie. And then it came back to do, I don't want to give any spoilers, but some almost follow-up.
Relationship mop-up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for you that felt...
It was actually nice to have some more closure to the movie than we were left with. But a lot of movies really do just stop and you can draw your own conclusions. And I always feel like I realize some people like that and allow you to use your own imagination. I've always felt it was a cop-out. I want to know what the author of the story had actually intended to happen, whether or not I agree with it.
In this case, and for this film, it felt incomplete until you get the coda, which basically, kind of gives you the last sort of link in the chain that they've been making. For this kind of film, it would have felt unfinished if they hadn't come back for that kind of coda. I think it's about sort of knowing how the beats of a romance play out. If they had left it off, it would have been some other kind of movie and not this kind of movie at all. I was thinking about Dog. Dog doesn't get really a name in this movie. There is a lovely dog played by two dog actors, but who is sort of brought into the lives of the main characters by their ill-fated pilot. And then the dog continues to be sort of a plot fairy, kind of moving them from place to place, and at sometimes, adding, peril and moving the characters along. And the dog starts off being very attached to one of the couple and ends up living with the other of the couple, and ultimately I think almost serves as kind of a relationship glue, even at the very end. And it almost makes me feel like people who say like have a kid to save the marriage. In this case, it's have dog to save the marriage, or at least to salvage the relationship when communication becomes too hard. And I have to say, for most of the film, I was most worried about Dog.
He seemed the most believable character at times.
Sometimes, but I think other times there is just sort of this sense of which we have like built-in desire for animals in our lives, our animal companions, to be safe. And so if anyone is anxious about watching this film because they don't know like how the dog does, I suggest you check out the Slate coverage of this very topic. It was a very reassuring article, and it also gives sort of voice to how many of us out there are like, well, I want to see this movie, but I don't know if I want to if the dog doesn't make it. So yeah, check that article out.
Yeah, I definitely felt that Dog was a stabilizing force at times, who, when everyone else was going crazy, Dog was like, no, you have to be calm. We have to work together or we're all going to die.
Of course, at other times Dog was exactly the opposite, but...
Yeah, sometimes it looked like Dog was trying to get them all killed.
To get them all killed. As I'm sort of coming to the end of my sort of responses to this film, I'm also thinking about, is there a place in our sort of film life for movies that just don't require that much of us? This movie would certainly be one of those. It doesn't require very much of us. Just sort of a mutual commitment to showing up and to being entertained by a story. And I think there is. I think there's room for lots of different kinds of media, especially, when one considers the vast majority of, like, what all has been made, that it's good that there's this kind of film and that there's this kind of film and that there's this. If it was all one kind of film, like if it was all, The Dark Knight Rises, we'd, at a certain point it would be like, that's not good. Sometimes people reject a film because, it's not the kind of movie I like to watch, and I hear that, and I understand that there's, like, taste and things that you are like, oh no, I'm just not going to watch that movie. But on the other hand, I think having some variety in your palette is a good thing too. And I think this movie kind of reflects how sometimes it's nice to have something kind of light on your palette. One of the things that made this relationship between these two characters feel real to me was that there was sort of this mutual care that they're able to demonstrate for each other. That this idea of it is only together that we, that together we are more than we could ever be apart. And it doesn't happen quickly or by accident. And I think that that's part of what makes, even for what is relatively a light romance, it makes this story pretty compelling.
Before we get to the override recommendations, I wanted to remind everyone to subscribe to our channel and also to go over to our site, novetovideo.com, and you can follow us there and leave comments here and leave comments there. We'll try to respond to as many as we can.
So far, so good.
Yes.
So this time, my veto override recommendation is for the Harrison Ford film, 6 Days, 7 Nights. Maybe 7 Days, 6 Nights.
You had it right the first time.
6 Days, 7 Nights. Also starring Anne Heche. How about you?
I would suggest, if you like this movie, going a slightly less serious, but still serious, just with comic elements put in, Castaway with Tom Hanks from 2000.
It's a very different sort of, but yes.
But also someone seeking to survive.
Romance. There you go. That's how the veto override is supposed to work. So next time on No Veto Video, we are going to be checking out
Steakland.
Steakland. Where can the good people find Steakland?
That is on Netflix.
Okay. So check out No Veto Video next time, where we will respond to Steakland, or check out Steakland on Netflix. I am just babbling at this point. We are grateful for your presence with us, and we'll catch up with you guys next time. Bye.
Bye.